समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
We've all been watching the big parade in Tiananmen Square in Beijing. This is to commemorate 80 years of what the Chinese call their victory against fascist forces and against Japan. Usually they add an unflattering adjective or two. And unflattering is a mild term for expressions they use for the Japanese, because they were fighting the Japanese. This big parade took place. We'll talk about the parade, what was on display. This, for Xi Jinping, was a big expression to say, look at my power. Look at my power, not just militarily. There was a lot of military power in display, and some of it would be the envy even of the US, because some of the missile systems that he unveiled, some of the anti-ballistic missile systems, because ultimately not every missile that somebody fires at the other side will get through. Most missiles will be stopped. So who is better at stopping missiles from coming in, and who's also more likely to get a missile through? That depends on how accurate and how fast your missiles are, and also their range, and what is your ability to intercept missiles coming at you, and at what distance, which means how high up in space or after re-entry, etc., etc. All of that was in display. There were also nearly 100 fighter aircraft, refuelers, big AEW aircraft, big bombers as well. This was really Chinese military power, the PLA military power in full display. There was also a stealth submarine. I will take you through some of that as we go along. You will also see some more coverage on this. Those links we will share with you. That's the reason I will not need to go into too much detail about these weapon systems. I will, however, mention them. So this was the military show of strength. But this wasn't just a military show of strength. This was also a political show of strength, because Xi Jinping had 26 heads of states with him. 26. Of the countries with which China shares borders, of the 14 countries, 11 were present there. 3 that were not present were 2 were usual suspects, India and Bhutan, and also Afghanistan, which sort of surprises me because China became the first country to recognize the Taliban government, yet Afghanistan wasn't there. But 11 of the 14 were there, as was Russia, as was North Korea, Iran, many other countries, and importantly, 3 European countries. 1, Serbia. So all right, you can say Serbia is not a member of NATO. Serbia is also a different kind of country. It has still remained a fair bit wedded to the old idea of Soviet era. It is still caught in that nostalgia. It's a rough country. Although it's an applicant for EU membership, not NATO, EU membership, but Vucic, the Serbian strongman, was there. That is not such a surprise. However, what's significant is there were countries from Asia, or countries that might be described as Eurasians, so Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan. All of these were there. There were also some European countries. There were African countries. Zimbabwe was there. Among the heads of states were also leaders of 3 European countries were there. European countries. That's a big surprise, because that says something about European unity, around which the entire Western support for Ukraine is built. So 3 European countries were there. And the leader of one of those said something, and I will quote those lines to you, because that will also be the context of a kind of parting note or a postscript to this episode of Cut the Clutter. And the line is, many in the EU, European Union, many in the EU are like frogs in a well. They sit at the bottom and they cannot see what is happening in the world, right? Frogs in the well, in Hindi you might say Koop Manduk, or Kue ka mendak. I am sure in other languages also there are equivalents, to which Vladimir Putin replies. This has been said to Vladimir Putin, to which Vladimir Putin replies by saying, I don't want to compare EU and NATO to reptiles and animals. They don't specialize in fairy tales. What he means is, because it's a translation from Russian, what he means is that they don't indulge in fairy tales. What they are conjuring up is not fairy tales. They are not conjuring up fairy tales. They are conjuring up horror films. And then Putin goes on to say, they are whipping up hysteria about Russia's plans to attack Europe. For a sane person, this is either a provocation or utter incompetence. So I will leave you with this. I will come back to this towards the conclusion of this episode of Cut the Clutter. You can meanwhile guess who's the one who used that Koop Manduk or frogs in the well description. Now I told you this was a big political message, and the message was read where it was meant to be read. To that extent, Xi Jinping knew his audience because he made this big show of strength, and Donald Trump, not to be left behind, wrote a sizable Truth Social post, which you will see on your screens. I will only give you an abridged version of it. This will have his usual punctuations, etc. You can read that and enjoy. But he says that, he says, congratulations, enjoy your 80th anniversary, etc., etc. But also remember the sacrifice and blood that the American soldiers contributed. American soldiers actually fought quite well to help the Chinese defeat the Japanese. Also the American soldiers, and that is something that we spoke about in an earlier episode on drone strikes over alpha camps inside Burma. And that is when we described what was the hump. So this was the hump over which flying tigers of the US Air Force used to carry out drop sorties or supply sorties for Chinese troops fighting the Japanese. They would go over Burma, and that is where that famous or infamous Lake of No Return is located, where it was believed that a lot of American aircraft disappeared along with their crew. Donald Trump says, therefore, give credit to us Americans too. And then he says, please give my warmest greetings to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un as you conspire against the United States of America. To which reply comes from Yuri Ushakov. Yuri Ushakov is the Kremlin spokesperson who says this is ironic that America is talking about others conspiring against them. We are not even thinking about this, but we understand the US role in what's going on. However, I will add a footnote here that in an earlier speech in 2020, that is 5 years back, then there was no parade. That was the 75th anniversary of the Chinese victory. To mark that, Xi Jinping had a big meeting, not a parade, had a big meeting. The last parade was to mark the 70th anniversary in 2015. In 2020, he did acknowledge the role of the Americans. He acknowledged the role of the Americans. He even thanked India for contributing to that effort, particularly Dr. Dwarkanath Shantaram Kotnis. In fact, in the 1960s, there was a black and white film which I saw as a school kid, Dr. Kotnis Ki Amar Kahani, based on his life, and also Government of India issued a commemorative stamp in his honor. That compliment was missing this time. This also tells you in the last 5 years, where has the relationship between the Chinese and the Americans gone? It has gotten considerably worse since then. And now Xi Jinping is signaling that this may not be a bloc, but this is a certain number of people and powers who've agreed to come together in some kind of a defiance to the Americans. And here, and this is something I had said earlier, and please don't misconstrue this to mean that all of these bye-bye will get together and drop all their nukes over America and its Western allies. No such thing will happen. But I'm using it just rhetorically. Even rhetorically, people who came to Beijing first for the SEO summit and now for the parade, everybody who came for SEO summit did not stay for the parade. For example, India, Prime Minister Modi did not stay for the parade. But these countries represent between themselves more than 2/3 of all of the world's nukes. Between Russia, the highest number in the world, then China, a close third after America, and then take India, Pakistan, North Korea. So that's a lot of nukes. What this tells you is that 5 nuclear weapons powers were here in Beijing. And that's the statement that Xi Jinping is making to Donald Trump. You've now irritated the rest of the world, particularly the powers, the non-Western powers, in the rest of the world sufficiently for them to come and collect here and for most of them to also attend this parade. In fact, it was during the parade when Putin had a meeting with Kim Jong-un. In fact, it was Kim Jong-un's first foreign visit in a long time, and there he thanked Kim Jong-un for providing troops for his war in Ukraine. And just recently, Kim Jong-un also gave gallantry awards to his soldiers who had fought in Ukraine, including some posthumous awards. So this is a very complex picture. At one level, it looks complex. At the same time, when you look at the parade, it doesn't look that complex anymore. This is a very big political and geostrategic statement that's being made by Xi Jinping, his allies, his friends, and some people who may not be his friends. India is not his friend, but they are also telling the Americans that, look, we have room for maneuver. We can go left, right a little bit. We are not part of a bloc, so don't take us for granted. That's a larger message in this parade as well. What is the signal that Xi Jinping is sending to the world? What is he saying? Please watch his words carefully or hear his words carefully. He says, today humanity is once again faced with critical choices: peace or war, dialogue or confrontation, win-win cooperation or zero-sum rivalry. The Chinese people firmly stand on the right side of history and on the side of human civilization and progress. This he says with all these other 25 heads of state sitting with him. Now, before we take you to the weapons systems parade, this was also, I told you about the political message that Xi Jinping was giving globally. This was also a message that he was conveying internally, a message of how powerful he was, how much in control he was. For several days before the parade, people in Beijing were told not to create crowds in any place, watch the parade only from their homes, to avoid any trouble. Those are things that do not happen in democracies. Those are things that happen in autocratic societies where the ruler has complete power. Also then see these parades, and you will see some bits of it as I'm speaking, maybe on half the screen. See in this parade. This parade, first of all, is being inspected by Xi Jinping in a car. And this car is a Chinese-made limousine, big limousine called Red Flag Limousine. That also is a statement of Atmanirbharta on his part, saying we make this fine cars, fine big luxurious cars. But he's standing there, and see what he says as he goes past every contingent of troops there. Very nicely turned out troops. In fact, the parade is so good that it will be the envy of the best armies in the world. I'm sure the Indian armies, subcontinental armies, they are nicely turned out. They will give this good competition. But this really puts to shame the apology of a parade that Donald Trump put out earlier in the year that looked a bit like some armed rabble going to a kind of Woodstock, as casual as that. This was different. This was serious stuff. But see what he says. Hear his voice as he goes past each contingent. And pardon me for my pronunciation, Chinese pronunciation, if I get it wrong. I will only try to pronounce this one in Chinese, not the response, because that's longer. He says, Tongji Men Hao. Tongji Men Hao. What that means is, comrades, you are fine. Translate this a little bit like from that film Udi, How's the Josh, right? And then comrades. He refers to his soldiers as comrades, and then they reply in 3 short sentences. Follow the party, fight to win, forge exemplary conduct. Important thing is the first response is follow the party. And that is something that you can see in his earlier speeches as well, and the speeches that we are quoting from, where we also picked up that nugget about his having acknowledged America and also India in 2020 on the same day, on the 75th anniversary, is from the collected works of Xi Jinping. In fact, it's called Selected Readings from the Works of Xi Jinping. I just call it collected works. And there also, he makes it clear that in China, the loyalty of the army has to be to the party. China is unusual. For Pakistan, the old cliche is that the army owns the country. In China, the party owns the army. So the command of the Army, Navy, Air Force, all armed forces is with the Central Military Commission of the Chinese Communist Party, CCP. And Xi Jinping heads both CCP and CMC, Central Military Commission as well. So this is a party-owned army. And that's the point that's made in these slogans also, even as he drives past, inspecting these individual contingents and taking salute from them. Now see the weapon system. Watch all these systems very carefully. Everything there which is non-nuclear, everything there that's non-nuclear will be available to the Pakistani armed forces in a scaled down version over the next 2 to 10 years. So first of all, see the unmanned armed vehicles, right? China now is producing drones to match the best in the world. In fact, the Americans have a lot of catching up to do there. Americans might have very good high altitude, long endurance drones of the kind Predators and others, of the kind they've used in Afghanistan, Iraq, Middle East, Yemen, etc. But those drones will find it difficult to survive in a protected airspace. Those drones are fantastic when there is no challenge in the air, when somebody has no air defenses and you have complete air superiority or complete control of the air. Otherwise, those drones will be shot down in no time, or MQ-9, the American drones. The Chinese, however, are coming up with newer and newer kinds of drones. So they display today armed reconnaissance drone, wingman drones. Now, wingman drones are like loyal wingmen. Loyal wingmen in new aerial warfare are aircraft, unmanned aircraft that fly along fighter aircraft, and they can be stores of depots of weapons. They can also be loaded with sensors, and they can be there in large numbers. So it's not as if one fighter and one wingman goes. These loyal wingmen then can saturate the battlefront in the air, help the pilot with situational awareness, also protect the pilot from getting close to danger. At the same time, they allow the pilot to become some kind of a commander in the air of a large armada, if I might use that word, of a large armada of aircraft. Because these are aircraft, they just don't have pilots, so no human life is put to peril there. The loyal wingman now is the direction for future aerial combat, because everybody wants to avoid casualties. Also, no aerial combat will now take place within visual ranges. Everything will be not just beyond visual ranges, but very far away from visual ranges. All mostly 100 kilometers or above, maybe going ahead 200, 250, 300 kilometers. And loyal wingmen will become critical to that. Another innovation is seaborne unmanned helicopter. The future is unmanned, because people, men and women, should stay back in safe places watching consoles and ordering these machines from a distance. Also displayed were unmanned aerial systems that are autonomous, because these are for air superiority. So these are unmanned systems that can fly, that can fight with other aircraft. We've seen some of these slower ones being used by Ukrainians to shoot down Russian combat helicopters, manned helicopters. But similar systems were on display in this Chinese parade, also to fight in a jet-filled environment. And once again, because you are fighting far away, you can't always be controlled from the ground. These ones also have a high degree of autonomy. Can you imagine if somebody were a pilot flying an aircraft, a $150 million aircraft, just the indignity of being shot down by an unmanned autonomous drone or an unmanned autonomous loyal wingman equivalent. That is where air combat is doing now. What the Chinese have told the world is that they are at the cutting edge of it. They are not 2 steps behind the Americans. Maybe they are half a step behind the Americans, but they are not even 1 step behind the Americans right now, because the other statement they make is with their missiles. And these missiles, the showpiece there is DF-5C. DF stands for Dongfang. That's a series of Chinese missiles. Dongfang means eastern wind or east wind. There's a whole Dongfang series. This one, DF-5C, it is 20,000 kilometer range. 20,000 kilometers, where will it go? Because every place in America is much less than 20,000 kilometers from China. So what will it do? So my facetious comment as soon as I saw the range was that maybe this missile will go around the world collecting frequent flyer points. The circumference of the Earth, by the way, is about 40,000 kilometers. So this can go halfway around the Earth. However, this also goes much faster. This also has much better guidance, not just from China's Baidu system that they've built with their own network of satellites, which they made available to the Pakistanis during Op Sindoor, but also many other targeting technologies so that this becomes a very accurate missile. It also obviously has a MIRVing capability. MIRVing, as we know, is drawn from MIRV, that is multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles. That is MIRV. So when missile goes up, then it lets off maybe 8, 10, 12, any number of missiles, and they go in different directions, distant directions, and go to distant targets. So it becomes very difficult for the defender to keep track of any of those. In fact, India just tested an Agni 5 in our eastern Indian Ocean zone, which had a MIRVing capability as well. That was about 5,000 kilometer range. This missile, the other innovation with the missile is this travels in 3 parts on 3 different vehicles. So it's not so big. The bigger you are, the easier it is for the other side one to target you and also to detect your movement. But it can move over 3 vehicles, and these can be put together very quickly. So launch can take place much faster than the missiles so far. That will give the Americans something to think about. There were also other missiles, that is 4 times. This is the 4th time. He's also last year survived an assassination attempt. He took several bullets and survived and persisted with the policies for which the assassin or likely assassin had targeted him. That policy was, after he won his election in 2023, he said he will stop supporting Ukraine in the war. Now, Slovakia shares its border with Ukraine, and Slovakia's lifeline, which is the gas pipeline from Russia, comes through Ukraine as well, and Ukraine has sometimes threatened to shut it as well. Now, Fico's country is a member not just of EU but NATO as well. And that's why it was very significant that a NATO member was present in Beijing, and he is the one who told Putin that I don't care what people in EU and NATO say. Slovakia has decided that it's going to have normal relations with Russia. So that's a breaking of the ranks within NATO. So this is a clear defection from NATO. You could also say that Hungary is there, although Viktor Orban himself did not come there. He sent his foreign minister. But Viktor Orban has also been taking a distant view of NATO's involvement with Ukraine. However, he has not yet fully defected. At the same time, when it comes to many key issues, it's very strange in European politics. We think India's politics is complex. Look at Europe. Now, Fico himself, he was a left populist. He was a left populist, but a lot of his politics now is right populist. That is true of Orban as well. Both are against immigration, and both are definitely against any Muslim immigration. I will give you some lines that Fico has used about immigrants from the Middle East. He says, for example, that we are an independent and sovereign country, so we will not accept any mandatory quotas of refugees from EU, because EU has this policy whereby they distribute these refugees, particularly from Middle Eastern countries, to its member states. That is what Orban has also done in Hungary. He says then, and I am quoting Fico, if we allow that, thousands of terrorists and IS fighters in Europe, Islamic State fighters in Europe will come in along with migrants. He says, we monitor every Muslim in Slovakia. In 2016, he said, we will not take even one Muslim migrant. And he went on to add, it may sound strange, but I am sorry, there is no place for Islam in Slovakia. This was ignored by other European countries. This was 2016 because they were taking migrants from Middle East anyway. Then he went on to say, Slovakia will not support Ukraine either financially or militarily to enable it to continue the war. See his tweet there. And that is why his presence in Beijing is significant for the Western world, for NATO and the US. It's also equally significant for Xi Jinping that he got him to attend this parade here and say the things that he said to Vladimir Putin. And he's made no secret of his intentions. He met Putin in December. Then he also came to Moscow on the Victory Day parade, on the Russian Victory Day parade in May. So this is the 3rd time now that he's meeting Putin as well. That is a big shift, and that's the reason this parade was as military in its significance as it was geopolitical.